Hi, this is BB Ukraine Analytics, the channel of top news, analytics and insights from Ukraine and about Ukraine. And my name is Bogdan Butkevych. I'm a Ukrainian journalist and blogger.
Hi, and I'm Olena Vostrova, a Ukrainian political psychologist and vlogger. And here we tell you the truth about Ukraine and Ukrainians without censorship and propaganda. Here we give you insider information about what's going on here in Ukraine.
So the top news of this week is, of course, the results of the NATO Summit in Vilnius.
The extremely high tension was created in Ukrainian society and summit itself because before the summit, Zelensky's office PR company artificially inflated expectations of Ukrainians. We expected to receive a formal invitation to join NATO at the summit, even if membership and the collective defense commitments that come with it would only be formalized after the war ends. We heard from the President's office about what our Western partners should do, and not a word about what we should do. Not a word about doing reforms or rooting out corruption or meeting standards.
All this caused a wave of emotional frustration in Ukrainians right after the summit. And this is not the first case where, Zelensky office manipulates the moods of Ukrainians and then blames anyone and anything but the President's office.
Other such cases are Ukrainian counteroffensive, which is actually not a counteroffensive but a strategic defense operation, Bakhmut fortress, and Mariupol Azovstal, when expectations were extremely inflated and then frustrated. I hope you understand that all these emotional swings prevent people from being in contact with reality, with objective reality, and calculating their strengths. So some people feel constant waves of apathy, despondency, depression, and other problems with mental health.
Zelensky himself reacted very emotionally. We will not analyze all his emotions and pressure he wanted to create on Western leaders, because his attempts did not work and did not change the results of this summit. But here are some very, important moments. On his way to summit, he writes an angry post in internet. Now, on the way to Vilnius, we received signals that wording is being discussed without Ukraine. It is unprecedented and absurd when there is no time frame for both the invitation and Ukraine's membership, and when some strange wording is added about conditions, even for the invitation of Ukraine. According to American press, Joe Biden and our American partners got so angry of this post that even wanted to exclude any guarantees for Ukraine from the text of the document.
So Zelensky criticizes NATO for weighing conditions to invite Ukraine into alliance, unprecedented and absurd. But what are the conditions? We told you about them in our previous video. They are to do reforms, root out corruption and meet standards. What is so unprecedented and absurd?
German Defense Minister Pistorius responds to Zelensky's emotions. I understand that dissatisfaction and impatience, adding that Ukraine has obligations to meet regarding NATO membership and that Zelensky understands this. Everyone says that the future of Ukraine is in NATO, when the war ends. And all this, it's a normal standard for all NATO member countries, said Pistorius.
Pistorius understands that Zelensky understands that Ukraine has obligations to meet NATO standards, and if in the military sphere our army meets them, in the political sphere our security and defense sector raises many questions. We all remember how before Russian invasion, Zelensky and Bakanov installed Russian FSB structure, Russian agents, right into Ukrainian security sector. And we all remember that the corruption scandals in our Ministry of Defense has not been solved yet and continue raising questions.
Director of the Anti-Corruption Center organization, Daria Kaleniuk, asked Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, during the NATO summit in Vilnius, what she should tell her son when she comes back home from the NATO summit.
I have a 2-year son. He was 2 years when Russia invaded Ukraine first in 2014. We were told then, guys, not ask for weapons. Negotiate with terrorists and do reforms. We behaved well. We've done reforms. We've negotiated Minsk. We didn't ask hard weapons. and Russia invaded us with a genocidal war. And now the NATO Summit is telling us, wait for more. And, when I was leaving Kiev, and my son is now sleeping in the corridor because of the air raids, I had to explain my son that, I'm going in order to meet President Biden and to ask him to invite Ukraine to NATO, that soon you will not need to sleep in the corridor. On Friday, I will be back in Kiev. Jake, please advise me, what should I tell my son? That President Biden and NATO didn't invite Ukraine to NATO because he's afraid of Russia losing, afraid of Ukraine winning, or there are back-channel communications with Kremlin, which is a terrorist organization, to reach the Minsk III deal. Should I prepare my son to be a soldier and fight Russians when he will be 18 years and 7 years? Thank you, Jake.
Daria Kalenyuk is the voice of all those Ukrainians who fight for their future democratic values and lifestyle. We want to do our best to do reforms, root out corruption and meet standards. And it seems that we got trapped between two fears that were revealed at the summit. The first fear is the fear of our Western partners that was articulated by Daria. Are you afraid of Russia? Are you afraid of Russia losing? Afraid of Ukraine winning? And the second fear, the fear of Zelensky to reform the corrupted infrastructure of his presidency.
Stoltenberg clearly explained that as long as Zelensky will not conduct a normal domestic policy, Ukraine will be supported. Yeah, it will be supported. No one will give Ukraine away, but there will be no joining and integration into NATO and to the European Union, which Zelensky and company desire to sell at the elections to the war-weary Ukrainian voters. First, it is necessary to stop stealing, including the funds of Western taxpayers, to stop building a personal autocracy and protect the environment, which consists of, persons completely discredited to the West, to whom Zelensky categorically refused to say goodbye, and then want to become the one who will lead Ukraine to the club of Western countries.
Therefore, right now, Zelensky is faced with a choice that is very simple. He must choose between his personal cult and presidential infrastructure created by Yermak and company, or integration into the Euro-Atlantic community.
That is, either you work for the country or you do not become a winner. Do you want to join us? Okay, well, you can be a son of a bitch, but you must be our son of a bitch. And if you cannot be relied on for anything, then, it will be like this. Hard, but as it is.
So Zelensky must choose, and we have to overcome the fear of our partners. Look at our brave people who are fighting along with the second army of the world.
Откатуємося далі, наверное. Раді пулік. Все нормально, все нормально.
We have to make Zelensky do reforms, root out corruption and meet standards. And if he does not find courage to do that, Ukrainians will choose a president and parliament that will do this. Otherwise, we all will have to prepare our children for a long and exhausting war with Russians.
And as for the summit results, first, nothing bad happened. On the contrary, military support will continue and will be increased. No one will abandon Ukraine.
I look forward to the day when we're having the meeting celebrating your official membership in NATO. So, thank you for what you're doing, and the bad news for you is we're not going anywhere. You're stuck with us. So thank you.
And it depends only on us, or from Ukrainians, how quickly we can enter the defense bloc of the West. And it is not only about the war, and also about how we will end it, this war, under which conditions and what exactly we are ready to do for this.
Second, there is a time to scatter stones and a time to gather stones together. Now Zelensky is gathering all the stones he has scattered, both bad and good. The policy of cavalry charges on the hype around the heroism of the armed forces of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people gave its natural result. The West perfectly understands that Ukraine must win, but Ukraine, not Zelensky himself.
No one, especially the Americans, will forgive Zelensky for his lies and failure to fulfill his promises, both public and non-public. And no matter how much you run to shout to the crowd again, this story will not help. The crowd can applaud to you. But Western elites, especially American and British, understood everything and, drew conclusions. And then you can get offended as much as you want, sniff and not come to the announced speeches. Time for words is over for Zelensky and company. Now the only deeds and only them will be evaluated.
And the third result is that we obtained the guarantees for permanent military support and will sign agreements with each country separately. And also received a lot of messages that in a year at the Washington Summit we can receive an invitation. We all hope for this. And the second top news of this week is namely our strategic defense operation.
Russian propaganda is very actively trying to convince the world that the Ukrainian offensive is unsuccessful and has almost failed. The same point of view is supported by some Western media and experts. Their theses are simple. The armed force of Ukraine failed to break through the main line of defense of the Russians in the south of Ukraine in a month of attacks. This means that everything is failed.
Everything written above absolutely doesn't correspond either to reality or to the real plans of the command of the armed forces
of
Ukraine. After all, the real situation is completely different.
At the beginning of June, Ukrainian troops carried out combat reconnaissance in several directions of the Russian defense, during which they were able to make the serious wedges. At the same time, the objective problems emerged, and they could not help but emerge. There is a superiority of the Russians in the air and extremely dense mining, which cannot be, quickly passed without aviation or heavy losses. The Ukrainian army drew conclusions from the first losses, including Western armored vehicles. First of all, from detonation on mines, and that's why it changed tactics. Now the armed forces of Ukraine and the south of Ukraine are engaged in the annihilation of Russian artillery, taking advantage of the quality of Western artillery on Russian and high precision Excalibur, for example, type shells.
Also, Ukrainian artillery inflicts huge losses on the enemy's infantry. At the same time, the armed forces of Ukraine are now moving forward in small infantry groups to minimize losses. And the armored vehicles provide support to the attackers from the maximum safe distance in order not to become a victim of anti-tank projectile launches from Ka-52 helicopters.
This tactic is not fast, but it is very effective. After all, the Russians are already forced to use strategic reserves in this strategic direction. Therefore, soon their defense will simply collapse.
Add to this the constant movement of Ukrainian assault units around Bakhmut, which the Russians repulse by using, again, strategic reserves. But they still cannot stop the movement of the armed forces.
That is why in recent days the Russians gathered reserves and launched an attack on the northern flank of the confrontation in the Kharkiv and Lugansk regions. They are trying to force the Ukrainian leadership to transfer our Ukrainian reserves, most of which are still waiting for their time. They are to repel their Russian attacks.
However, the armed forces repel these attacks, saving their reserves until the moment when the Russia defense finally cracks in the south.
Again, the background of quarrels in the Russian military leadership, this does not seem like a long task. After all, let me remind you that Putin removed Popov, General Popov, from the position as the head of the 58th Army, who was in charge in the key army on the Southern Front. And the deputy of this army died on July 11 when a Storm Shadow missile hit the command post of this army. So the Ukrainian offensive is going on, and it's going very well, especially in the absence of the F-16 aircraft and ATACMS type operational tactical missiles.
That's all for today. Please write your comments and questions right under this video.
Give us your like and subscribe to our channel, the channel of top news, analytics and insights from Ukraine and about Ukraine.
Here we tell you the truth about Ukraine and Ukrainians without censorship and propaganda. Here we give the Ukrainian worldview for the world. So subscribe for our channel if you want to know what's really going on here in Ukraine from the inside.